I forgive you. And literally had a peace come over me. That didn't take away the memories and the pain, but a peace came over me that allowed me to walk into a freedom that I'd never walked into before. My dad was he was a good businessman. He climbed his way to the top of lots of different companies that he worked for, and he was in the second marriage he was in, he was a faithful husband. He was a romantic husband. He was a thoughtful husband. He was a good friend to the friends that he had in the different seasons of his life, in those seasons. And the one thing I know about my dad that I remember is he was always he was very eloquent, very well spoken. He carried himself well. He was not given to anger. He was very calm tempered and just a steady, dignified man in the things that he did, and was well respected by his coworkers and neighbors and friends, you know, at the different places that he lived in the different seasons of his life. So yeah, I always remember he had a very high sense of etiquette, and so he knew his manners and was pretty good in some social scenes. So
do you know anything about his dad?
yeah, my grandfather, his father, was much the same. Not incredibly emotional, not incredibly emotive in his language and in his actions, but was steady as well, caring. He was a hard worker. He served in World War II, and was a good businessman, and stayed in the same house his entire life and never left, never moved. So he was, but he was also very dignified and very well mannered, and just a good, respected well in the community.
Tell me a story when you came to understand that you had a wound.
Well, it was in two very distinct points in my life. The first time that I really realized it, when my dad left my mom and left his three sons, we were at different ages. So I was 2.5, 3 years old. My other brother was 9, and my oldest brother was 12. And so because of our ages, the way we responded to it was differently. So my oldest brother, because he was in the middle of puberty and, you know, middle school, going into middle school, he was very angry and very frustrated. And my middle brother, because he was 9, he was just confused and looking for his identity. And then I'm 3 years old. I just grew up thinking it was normal to get on a plane and go see your dad 2-3 times a year and let him take you out to dinner and spend a bunch of money on you while you were there. And I just thought that was normal. And so it wasn't until high school, when I had come to faith in Christ, I got involved in a youth group, and the youth pastor at the time, who I would find out had his own daddy wound, was speaking about the influence of fathers. And as a high school student, it's the first time I realized, okay, there's been something off in me, and I've just never had a name for it. And so it was the first time that I recognized, I think I've got some deficits that I just haven't been at least explicitly aware of, that were leading to some emptiness and frustration in my life. And that just kind of settled there. And so I walked in that for a little while, and then it wasn't until I was in college and somebody introduced me to a study on manhood that was done by a church in Arkansas, and the pastor went through this multiple part series on manhood, and we got to the point where he did a lesson on the father wound, and everything that I had thought or been suspicious of since high school just got clarified in this series, and that there were indeed deficits that I had, longings that I had, and frustrations that I had, and just pains that I had from my dad not being there growing up, and a lot of question marks. And it's the first time that I was not only informed about the wound, but really processed the wound in both unhealthy and then healthy ways. So really those were the two distinct points where God really just began to make me aware of the fact that there was a wound in my life.
With looking back as a result of that,
Mm-hmm.
How is it that God connects the dots with your behavior versus the wound?
I think, what I came to learn is most men that have father wounds tend to act them out either in expressive behaviors or they begin to hold them in through suppressive behaviors. And I had a little mix of both. I had an inner sense of confusion about who I was and what the Sumlin name meant. I had many practical things that were missing from my life that other kids had from their dads who were present. Just basic stuff. How to get dressed and tie a tie and know how to work on cars, things like that I just had no clue about and was never a self-student of. And then there was just, I think, some emotional fractures that were there from conversations that misfired when I was a kid with my dad, and that turned into more of bitterness towards the fact that how could you leave? How could you do that to your kids? How could you leave us with this? And so some of that was acting out and me pursuing an identity in the wrong things. And some of those were holding them in and not wanting to identify what they were, not wanting to face them, not wanting to have the conversations that needed to be had with my dad. And so it was, again, through some of these studies that I was doing that began to expose that and go, hey, these are symptomatic of some things going on in your life that you need to take a look at. Yeah, I think I went through multiple phases of different feelings. I mean, when I first began to identify that I had a father wound, it first manifests itself in just really kind of frustration and bitterness and thinking, now, why did he leave? Why did he walk out on us? Did he not? I mean, was it something we did? Were we making it too hard on him to be in the home? And I think so at first I started kind of pointing the finger at myself and going, well, man, maybe I just wasn't what he wanted. And so you feel a sense of, man, it's my fault, or, and then transcends into, abandonment. And then it leads to, no, wait a minute. I mean, I was 3. I didn't do anything, It's him. And then it turned into frustration that evidenced itself in anger and blaming him and just getting mad at him. And I probably lived there for the longest, just mad at him that he made the choice. He had a choice and he made it. And then when I began to address the wound, it began to really turn into just not self-guilt or not blaming him, but just turned into just loss and just going, I just miss him. And it's not putting a fault on it anymore. It's just going, man, I just wish I had you. I wish you were there for this. I wish you were there for that. I wish we had a relationship right now. And then continued to morph after that. But I've gone through all the phases of anger and frustration and sadness and loss, and to then pouring over to, sympathy and forgiveness and compassion, towards him.
What are the good things you learned from your dad?
I've thought a little bit about that. I didn't have my dad, but 2 times a year for 35 years at the time. And so I had to pick up little pieces here and there. And part of it is I can look at myself and I look at my brothers, and had I never even met my dad, but heard about him, I could figure out that we've actually, because we're his kids, his sons, we've got some similar things. Our laughs are similar. Our signatures are similar. And so there's just some mannerisms and things that we picked up just genetically from my dad that evidences the fact that we're his sons. But there are some little bits and pieces of things that I picked up along the way. I watched the way that he treated his wife, my stepmother. And, for all I can say about how he treated my mom, the way that he treated her for the next 30 years was amazing. I mean, he was a faithful husband to her. He loved her. He cared about her. He romanced her. He dated her. He valued and cherished her. And I watched that, and I'd pick up some of those things. I'd pick up some of the cool romantic things he would do for her when I would go to stay there, and go, man, that's kind of cool. I hope I can treat my wife like that one day. And I watched the way that he interacted in tense situations. He just kept his cool. He didn't fly off the handle. And so I think I picked up a calm demeanor that's not filled with anger towards folks just by watching that in my dad. And so there were, different little things here and there, but I had to kind of a la carte piecemeal it along the way, and then figure out that's where it was coming from. But there's some neat things like that I picked up some traits from him that I'll hold with me today.
How about the bad things?
It's hard to say what are the explicit bad things, because I think because of the wound, I spent most of my life trying to be the antithesis of him. And so he left his kids, I'm not going to leave my kids. And some of it, and I had to correct this through the gospel throughout the years, but some of it early on was no, I'm going to show him. I'm going to pull up those bootstraps, and I'm not going to, but I think there's some passivity that is in him. Some of it's that calm demeanor. Some of it errs on passivity in certain situations that I think I've grabbed as well. But thankfully, I think the positive side of him leaving us is I was able to very clearly see what are the negative aspects that I don't want to have, that I want to actively rebel against, and what are the cool little small pieces that I want to adopt. And so there's certain things in my dad that I had to adopt, which is beautiful. Certain things that I had to adapt and tweak for Christ's sake. And then there's certain things about my dad that I just had to all out reject. And this has probably been the most recent thing for me to process through with him, especially after his passing. And that is, because he left in an affair and married his secretary and ran away, I villainized her and I villainized them almost my entire life, just going, well, she's the one that took my dad away. And so this marriage I can't ever value, because that's the marriage that ended my dad's presence in our home. But through God's grace, through him working through those things in me, I've been able really in recent years just to actually pull away and go, okay, compartmentalize it just a bit. In the context of this marriage, he's actually a really good husband to her. And he actually really has a solid marriage. And so I think I was able to parse those out a little bit, where I could remove the marriage in the context of the sin that it came out of and look at it for what it is in its current state and go, okay, there's some redemptive things there that I can pull from.
His example as a father, how did that influence you as a father?
Yeah, I think in a couple of ways. Obviously, I didn't have the in-home model to pull from, so I still don't know what kind of dad he was in the home. I hear stories of my older brothers, and he was their Cub Scouts leader and Indian Guides leader and baseball coach, and I hear those stories. He was gone by the time I came in. But I hear about those things, and those things were my early model of, at least in theory, of what a dad was. And prior to the divorce, he was presently engaged in the home, and he was active with the kids. And then I've got my parsed out experiences of visiting him a couple times a year. And so in those encounters, he was, because I had a week or two at a time, he was very intentional with those week or two. And I got to watch him at work, go to work with him a couple times. He would play with us, he would take us places. And so I learned a playful side from him. But obviously the biggest imprint was his absence. And so just his physical absence of being gone all those years, actually God used that to instill in me what presence needed to be like. And so a lot of it was just processing what I missed out on and God repurposing that into my parenting today. And so, part of it is I probably am thankful to some degree for the absence of my father, because it made me very much aware of my need to be intentional and to not take things for granted and to be present and engaged, not only physically but spiritually and emotionally with my kids today. So I think I'm actually, I wouldn't have asked for it this way, but I would say that I'm a better and healthier dad for my kids because of what I went through. And a lot of kids, it's a Russian roulette when it comes to who their stepfather is going to be. I happen to get a great stepfather. He wasn't a godly man. He didn't walk with the Lord and invest in me spiritually, but he was a anchor presence in the home. He was active in my life, and the Lord brought him to us just in time. My older brothers had a more difficult time because of the season that they're at, because I was so young. He came at the perfect time, and he got to be my peewee coach in baseball and then in football, and he brought a lot to our home. And so I got a lot of my anchor presence in my own kid's life from my stepfather. But spiritually speaking, that had to come from the church. I didn't have a godly family. I didn't have a Christian family. And so I had to find that family model in the church. And so whether it was Sunday school teachers early on, youth minister, who were the kind of the daddy figures for me, coaches and whatnot, even at school, became that daddy figure for me. But probably the most intentional was when I was in college. I was volunteering as a Sunday school teacher for our church in town, and I was leading a 3-year-old Sunday school class, which was corralling kids and trying to get them to learn about Christ. But there's this one particular boy who was just unique in that group, and God used him to really minister to me in so many significant ways. But every Sunday that his dad would come to drop him off and pick him up, I would get about 1-minute encounters with this dad, and just, hey, how you doing? What's going on? And finally, one day, he shows up to pick up his son, and he said, hey, what are you doing this Thursday night? You want to come over to our house, have some dinner? And I'm thinking, man, I'm in college, and I'm hungry, and I'm broke, so yes, I would love to. And that's all I thought it was. And I remember walking into his home, and he had 2 sons and his wife, and I remember just walking to his home, and the first thing I noticed in his home was instant peace. There was just peace in the home. I couldn't explain it. The kids were crazy. They were running around doing all kinds of stuff, but there's just peace in the home. And I got to watch him that evening, the way that he interacted with his wife. We sat down at the dinner table. We all held hands, and he prayed over that meal. And that had never happened in my home before, to see a godly man grab his son's hands and this visitor that's with him and his wife and pray. And I watched what discipline of the kids looked like that night. I watched him discipline his kids. I saw what a conflict in his marriage looked like that night, and how he went off and resolved that. And it was just this micro picture of what a leadership in a home could look like. And that one Thursday night turned into me coming back the next Thursday night, and that turned into a 1.5 years of every Thursday night having dinner at his house. And I literally got a model of what it meant to be a godly husband and a godly father from having dinner in that man's house, by him inviting me in his home and letting me see it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so those encounters, as well as just daily time with the Lord, and the Lord chastening my own heart and showing me what it means to be a father, from the fact of how he fathers me, of how our God fathers us as the eternal Father. All those things, the Lord was just gracious to bring all those pictures into my life, into a home where my biological father wasn't present.
How did you find forgiveness for your dad?
That was the big one. So probably I'm 38 now, almost 39. About 7 years ago, my early 30s, I'm just had my first 2 children, I think, at the time. And I was going back through the authentic manhood study that I had done when I was in college. And I'm with another group of men. We're going back through it, and we get to the father one again. At the end of that series, we're challenged to go deal with the wound. And so if you've got a wound and you recognize this, Don't sit by and wait for your dad to come to you and apologize and tell you he's sorry and all these things. Go find him. If he's still alive, if he's still present, if he's still available, go seek him out and ask for it. And I thought, man, I just, I didn't do it in college. I'm thinking, I can't do it now. There's just no way. And all the years of my dad leaving, we had never talked about the divorce. We had never talked about the affair. We never talked about him leaving. It was just me going, visiting, enjoying time with him, and then coming back. And so we just never had the conversation. And so my buddies encouraged at least start just praying about it. And so sure enough, I just start praying, Lord, if you want me to talk to my dad and confront this and get everything out, then you're just gonna have to open this door, because I don't know how to do it. And literally that week, something crazy happened. My dad emailed my brothers and I blasting us for something which he had never done before. Never. And it was for some misunderstanding of something. And he just emailed us and told us, his thoughts on it. And my oldest brother lashed back at him. My middle brother didn't even respond. And I thought, okay, this is my opportunity. And I just emailed him back and I just said, hey, Dad, I've been thinking a lot about our relationship. And I just think that this email just brings to the surface the fact that there's a lot of stuff under the surface between you and us as your sons. And I think it'd be great if we ever got the opportunity to sit in a room with you and let's just talk about the divorce. Let's just talk about all these years. And I hit send and I was like, oh no, what's going to happen out of this? And sure enough, he emailed back and he said, you know what, I think that'd be a great idea. I'm going to fly down there. He was living in Nebraska at the time. He said, I'm going to fly down there. And we just could not believe it. And so we set up a time. So my dad flew in and we sat in the living room, my brother's house. And it was my dad on the couch, all three brothers across from him, like a tribunal. And we're all sitting there and, okay, let's do this. And this is the first time in our whole life we're going to talk about this. And so what we did for the next probably 5 hours, I don't even know how long it was long, is one by one, each of the brothers and I just opened up and shared with our dad everything we've always wanted to tell him. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And some of it was painful. Some of it, I felt sorry for him at some points because I just thought, oh my gosh, we're going to kill him just with a hurt language. And then it got to me, and I just simply shared with him 18 of the most significant things that I feel he missed out on in my life, or more importantly, that I missed him on. And I just walked through and I said, Dad, you weren't there for my first date. You weren't there for prom. You weren't there when I proposed. You weren't there when the birth of my first child, or any of my children. And I just shared with him, and I'm in tears sharing this with my dad. And in that moment, everything got released. And I didn't spew venom on him. I just told him, I loved you, I missed you, and I wish I could have had this. And we asked questions. Why did you leave? And I wish I could tell you that in that moment, my dad just broke down, started crying, and said, I'm so sorry, and I'm sorry for the pain I've caused you, and I wish I could tell you that even after that encounter, we rekindled this relationship, went fishing, and did all these father-son things. It didn't happen. My dad never said he was sorry. He never said he regretted. In fact, we asked him, do you have any regrets for walking out on a family? And he said the only regret is that he wished our stepmother would have been our biological mother, and not what you wanted to hear. And there's still so much pain there, but this is what I can tell you. In that moment, I literally, emotively, physically forgave my dad. And I just looked at him and I said, you probably don't need to hear this, but I need to say it. Your leaving hurt me, and I've kept it in all these years, and I'm letting it go now. I forgive you. I forgive you. And I love you, and I don't know what's going to come of this, but I forgive you. And literally had a peace come over me. That didn't take away the memories and the pain, but a peace came over me that allowed me to walk into a freedom that I'd never walked into before. and it just wasn't hovering over. This cloud that had been over me dissipated, was gone, and it was literally nailed to the cross, and I walked in freedom, and I just gave it over. And so even though nothing reconciled out of that moment, that conversation that day just took the pack we've been carrying and just gave away to the Lord. The issue with fathers is simply a symptom of the real issue, which is the sin in our lives. And so we live in a broken and fallen world, and when man chose to rebel against God in the garden, that's when everything went counter to what God's created purposes were. And one of those purposes is that dads would be, the spiritual leaders would be engaged with their children and would be present with them. And when sin came about, we rebelled against God and ran after our own selfish ways. And so I would say, I think that for me is the root symptom, that's root issue that's behind everything in the brokenness in our world. And until that gets reconciled with the cross, with Jesus Christ, it'll never auto-correct itself. But one of the primary symptoms that I've seen all over the world, but I think specifically in Western culture in America, of sin is the selfishness that's in the heart of fathers. And I think because of sin in their hearts, they have rebelled against God's created order towards the home. And they have chased after their own selfishness. And I wrestle with it in my own heart every day as a father. I press against my own selfishness. It's just simply the grace of God that keeps me from carrying that out to its furthest end and leaving my family and walking out on my wife and kids. And but I think certainly in our American culture, the issues and the breakdown in the home are at an unprecedented level and stem from fathers who are abdicating their responsibility to lead and nourish the home spiritually, as they were called to do. I think the pride of our own hearts. I think we want to be strong on our own. We don't want to admit failure. We don't want to admit weakness. And I think that's the lie of old, even from the garden, was the serpent. God lays out his clear plans, and serpent comes along and says, "No, God didn't mean that. He's holding out on you." And I think even to this day, whether it's the dad that leaves the home, or whether it's the son or daughter that's wrestling through the absence of that father, there is a pride within us that wants to go, "No, I am self-sufficient. I don't need God. I don't need his grace. I don't need forgiveness. And I don't need to face these wounds that I'm encountering. I need to run from them, and I need to pursue, and I need to self-medicate and these things." And so I think inside of our hearts, our own pride becomes our own downfall. And somehow thinking that we can do this on our own, and we can ignore it and put up the walls and act like it's not there, and then medicate it in some either expressive or suppressive behavior, ends up being our own downfall.
I totally bought into the whole idea of success.
Mm-hmm.
I need to make a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
Why do you think men buy into this concept?
Yeah. First of all, it's the lie, especially of our Western culture. The pragmatics of consumerism, the pragmatics of what we have morphed into, the American dream. And so our country, first of all, sells that to us. That doesn't come from God. That comes from man, who tries to convince us that our identity is in these things. And until we succeed and accomplish in the eyes of the culture around us what it is they say we need to succeed and accomplish in, then we will chase at those things at all expense. And so I will sell out my home, I'll sell out my family, I'll sell out my wife, I will sell out my moral compass, I will sell out everything if it means that I can be significant in the eyes of my work, of the money that I can earn, and these things, because that's what our world says that's where your ultimate value is. And I think because of that, it's this carrot that's put out in front of us in this never-ending cycle. And until someone, and I would say God, breaks in and counters that, breaks our identity grip on that and goes, no, you're significant in me, so you can rest in those things. And then out of that, understand what are the greater purposes I've called you to. That your home provides the greater currency than your job or your success ladder that you're going to climb. And so make your deposits there rather than here, and make them count for eternity, not for the temporary accolades of our culture.
Watch the Father Effect movie for free on YouTube.